אורחת הכבוד שלנו היא מרגוט וולסטרום, שכיהנה עד לפני שנה כשרת החוץ של שוודיה, ועם יומה הראשון בתפקיד הכריזה כי תנהיג מדיניות חוץ פמיניסטית. זה היה צעד יוצא דופן ונועז. בעקבותיה הלכו מדינות נוספות, וגם אנחנו רוצות ללמוד ממנה. השיחה עם השרה ועם במאי הסרט תיערך באנגלית, ניתן להפעיל את התרגום הסימולטני לעברית וערבית. נשמח אם תכתבו שאלות בצ'אט במהלך הראיון, השיחה, ולאחר מכן נעלה אותן בפני השרה. Thank you very much, Minister Wallström, for joining us. This is a great honor. Many feminists in Israel followed you and the feminist foreign policy you declared with lots of curiosity and admiration. I want to start by asking you, what led you to choose and to declare the feminist foreign policy?
First of all, Netta, thank you so much for inviting me. This is truly an honor and such a pleasure, and it seems like a very worthy way to honor also Nama, that I understand was as beautiful on the inside as she looked. And thank you also for asking me that question. Well, when we took office, a new government took office in 2014, and I became the foreign minister. And of course, we were lucky to say that foreign policy has traditionally been founded on consensus about some guiding principles, like how we look at the defense of human rights and democracy in the world, the international solidarity, security policy, what have you. All of these things have gathered big and broad political support in Sweden. But we also wanted, of course, to give our government a chance to create a profile for our foreign policy. And I was the one to formulate this and to present it. And one of the points that we mentioned was, and this was very much my idea, to pronounce a feminist foreign policy. And of course, I could almost hear people gasp in the room, you know, diplomats that maybe became a bit nervous. What on earth is this? And I also realized that you had to immediately define. So what is feminism, first of all? And also and it is as simple as accepting that women and men should have the same rights and the same obligations and the same opportunities. Then I also realized that it had to become a practical tool. So I defined 3 parameters that I wanted all of our diplomats and the whole diplomatic corps to apply in the different country situations. I said it's about, and it starts with an R, so the 3 R's. The R for rights, check on whether girls and women enjoy the same legal and human rights in a country. Can they go to school? Can they start a business? Can they open a bank account? Can they have the same legal rights as every man? Can they take any job that they want? Secondly, what about representation? Are they there around the table where important decisions are being made? Are they in parliament? Are they in governments? Are they in boards of big companies? And where do they have economic empowerment? And thirdly, resources. What about the budget, and is there a gender budgeting? Can we check whether the resources go to meet the needs of also women and girls? And I think with the help of these parameters, and you can say that it starts with the 4th R, which is a reality check. You know, what does it look like in this particular country? And I know that many diplomats very soon came back and said, well, you know, we started to look into the question of child marriages, for example, that if you count, there are so many girls being married away in big parts of the world before they are 18. And also they said, well, we looked at who do we invite to our embassies? Who do we listen to? The events that we organized. So this was opening up a lot of things also when it comes to the reality check. And then we made sure that in the ministry, we actually, first of all, we trained women negotiators and mediators, because the whole idea, why does it belong to foreign policy, has to do with the fact that we know if women are engaged in peace negotiations, in mediations, you will have more options on the table and any peace agreements will last longer. And of course, we know that reality is very few of peace agreements have a woman's signature still. It's only a small part of them. So it really, we know that more women means more peace. So it makes sense. So we did that as well, created a network of women mediators and negotiators. We engaged, of course, through the Security Council, since we also gained a seat in the Security Council for 2 years. We used that to make sure that we all the time raised our hands asking, where are the women? Are they there as peacekeepers? Are they there as negotiators? Do we listen to them? We invited as many women as men to come and brief the Security Council. So you have to be consistent. And I finally, just to not make a too long answer to your question, but of course I am very much shaped by and influenced by what I experienced and encountered in my previous assignment as an SRSG on sexual violence in war and conflict. And that took me to war and conflict zones around the world. And it, as I often say, it gave me a heavier heart, but also paradoxically more hope for the future, because women do not want to be seen as victims only. They are also actors for change in their own lives and for their countries.
Okay. So you bring me to my second question. When we are advancing 1325 principles in Israel, we're often facing arguments, bringing up many examples of women in Israel and around the world who are not advancing peace, nor human or women's rights. What is your answer to these kinds of arguments against the women, peace and security agenda?
I have never argued that women are better than men. You know, but it's a democratic thing. We make up half, and in some countries more than half of the population. We have our views and our experiences and our own ideas. And it is such a loss not to engage half of the population. And of course, there are good and bad women as well. But the thing is, if you leave us out systematically, if you discriminate against women, then you lose the potential of half of your population. So it's not to say, as much as we would like to think that we are better, and you know, that we have we bring something different, a different view and perspective with us. And sometimes it might not be better, but you need that as well and definitely to be able to reach peace, because women are often the ones who carry a lot of responsibility. And of course, I saw it so much in Africa, where unfortunately most of these ongoing wars and conflicts are playing out in a way that you have systematic use of sexual violence and rape in war and conflict as well. And but women they carry children, they carry food, they carry water, they carry produce to the market, they carry a lot of responsibility, but they should not have to carry shame for having been attacked or abused as well. But that was until then, that was very much the case, because there was almost total impunity these kinds of crimes. But women need to be there because it's a democratic point of view. Absolutely.
We saw you in the film, a single woman around the table at the UN Security Council, and maybe it's not the only time you were the only woman around the table. How does it feel to be the only woman around the table in the discourse of peace and security?
Well, I have throughout my political career that has now and then been the case. So I have some experience from knowing that, but it has also improved. I mean, thanks to women fighting for women's rights, for democracy, we have a different situation. But yeah, it can be rather daunting at times, but you just have to gather that kind of courage that it takes sometimes to be alone. And I believe that those networks of women, the contact with other women, is extremely important. And you know, this is also why they say already at the Beijing conference for women, they said you need to gather a kind of critical mass. And they said it's around 30% where women will not only be seen as a token woman, but actually you can come together and you can form and support a policy that you really want to see.
Yeah. In the film, you are quoting an old Roman saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. And you say at the UN, you don't believe in that. If you want peace, you have to prepare for peace. So how do you prepare for peace? How can the Israeli government prepare for peace?
Well, it starts with all the diplomatic and political tools to use them. And of course, that starts with dialogue, to establish a dialogue, to try to understand the other. And I often refer to Amos Oz and his books, because I really think that in his book, for example, how to cure a fanatic, I think he points to some of the most important things when it comes to opening up for a dialogue. So it's really about starting use all the other instruments than violence to make sure that you can build security and peace. And that involves understanding that the other part also has an interest, and where can we meet and how can we compromise. So I think this is always part of it. And today there is a lot of discussion about security policy. And there is actually in the shadow of this pandemic, because we cannot discuss all of these things without also talking about the current situation. But in the shadow of this pandemic, where people everywhere ask, well, where is the money we don't have money, countries and governments complain they don't have the money. Well, apparently they have money enough to invest in weapons. And a lot of money goes into, and I think it happens in the shadow of the pandemic. So big countries around the world are investing enormous amounts of money in upgrading and modernizing their arsenals, including nuclear arsenals, buying new weapons like the UK, or you can take any country. And of course, the big ones, the superpowers, do this all the time. And I think here is an area where women's voices need to be heard. Because how do you build proper security? Well, you fight, as I understand, Nama was for also your friend, and in her honor that we discussed this. Because if you don't fight inequality, then you will forever live in a country with insecurity. You will always have sort of those gaps between differences between people. So you build it into our society. And look at America, where so many millions of people don't have daily health care or even food. They are poor. So I think that this is the challenge for all of us.
I want to take you to one of the funniest or weirdest moments in the film when Trump was threatening the North Korean leader, saying that his red button is bigger and more powerful. I don't know if it's funny or sad or unrealistic, but the feeling is that we need to create a whole new discourse that women and feminists can fit into. Do you see that happening in the near future? Can you give us an optimistic timetable for that?
It takes an effort to be optimistic in those days, because there are many phenomena and many developments that seem to go in the other direction, you know, into disaster. And that is encompasses everything from climate change to environmental problems. Just this morning I listened to on the radio to a program about water and water scarcity, and we will see much more of that. And we know that we need water, we need bees, and they are sort of, they die, and all of this can seem like, and also the fact that we have this buildup of military capacity, including nuclear weapons, and new countries. I mean, we see that Iran wants to have nuclear weapons. We know that North Korea wants it. We now hear that South Korea also want to invest in that. And we see that China and America and Russians are investing in their nuclear weapons. And so there is an existential threat that makes it difficult to be optimistic. But I also think that, to me, women represent the voice of reason. And I guess you reacted, I don't know if you have children, but I have children and grandchildren, and I come to think of children. And very much I found that President Trump acted like a spoiled child. And that at the same time that this is dead serious, of course. And in many other situations as well, where you react. And I found that women do that. That's their way of looking at things. But couldn't we do it differently? And that's why I'm saying the voices of women are missing from that conversation about peace and security. And we have to make sure that they are not stopped by being attacked in their own homes. There is so much violence against women in their homes. So that will not allow them to fully capture the role of also influencing our common destiny, because your destiny is also our destiny.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have 3 little boys whom I'm trying to bring up to be feminist men. But as you say, it's not that easy in the circumstances. And I will share with you a situation and some frustration for us in Israel from recently. Earlier this week, we held a big rally in front of the Knesset, Women Wage Peace, a very, very big movement, איתך, מעכי, and many other NGOs, MKs, and diplomats calling the government to adopt the principles of 1325. And at the same time, a few hundred meters from us, inside the Knesset, Prime Minister Netanyahu talked at an event marking the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And he said, I'm quoting, women aren't animals that you can beat. Nowadays, we say, don't hit animals too. We understand that they also have wisdom, cognition, and feelings. We have compassion for animals, women, and animals. We have compassion for animals. Women are animals. Children are animals. Animals with rights. This poor saying leads me to my final questions before I will share with you the questions from the audience. In Israel, we usually look with envy at Scandinavian countries in terms of gender equality status, not in terms of the weather. You had a government that declared itself as a feminist government, something that we can hardly dream about. And yet, watching the film and knowing the backlash that you suffered for the changes you brought, it seems that the current political international structures cannot really have a way to deal with such an essential change in thinking, like the feminist foreign policy suggests. What are the changes needed in local and international level in order to make it happen?
That was almost several questions into one, and it's the $1 million question almost. What has to happen? Well, first of all, what has to happen is that women and organizations and universities and different groups, civil society groups, have to continue to come together and say, this is what we expect from our leaders. It requires leadership, good leadership. And I think also we got some hope from the change of power in the US, I have to say. And I don't know, maybe there are many in Israel that fear that, you know, things will, maybe many thought that Trump was truly a friend of Israel and showed that in different ways. But I think that you will see that also the Biden government cares about the situation in Israel and the situation in the Middle East. And I hope that he and his cabinet will be more open to see the bigger picture and how to create also dialogue and a way forward that will bring more of understanding and a better dialogue forward. I think women have to continue to fight for their rights. I hope that both the UN as well as the European Union and other regional organizations will take this on. I think we have to use opportunities like this to put the spotlight, shine a light on what goes on in daily lives, and also see that this is not only the right thing to do, but it's a smart thing to do. This is better from all aspects to bring women into decision making, and you have to be what you do when you stick your neck out, as I did and as the government did by pronouncing that we would pursue a feminist foreign policy, was that you also create expectations, because people will stop, well, what does that mean? And are you really a feminist government? Well, we had to show that we were 50-50 men and women in the government, which we are. We had to make sure that we appointed women as ambassadors, that they could be promoted, which we've done. So we had to prove that we were serious about this, and that helps to drive things as well. So I think you have to continue to put pressure in a democratic way on your government and on all your leaders, and also train women to take on new posts and new jobs. And can I just say that, you know, from the movie, that this is something that of course hurt me a lot, to be depicted in a way that is absolutely false, and being an anti-Semite to I don't know what I haven't heard that I've been accused of. And I've never had any other interest than to also see to the role of Israel and Israel's need for security, for example, but also move things in a way that can bring sort of the Palestinians on board. And of course, the recognition of Palestine meant that we could also talk to them and tell them what we think about things that have to change if this is to be real. So I have no other interest than peace in the Middle East and development for both Israel and Palestine. And you know that we worked a lot for exactly what you have tried to do as well, to start a dialogue, to have people meet from both sides. Because unless you do, there will not be peace, real peace, and sustainable peace. And you have to be able to meet and understand and talk, and sometimes you, or maybe even very often, you disagree, but you can still be in a dialogue about the future.
Thank you for your candid answers. I see that many people wrote some questions in the chat, so I will share it with you, and if you can answer those questions as well. Moran Barir asks, Minister Wallström, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I watched the film yesterday and it filled me with hope, love and inspiration. My question, a very strong moment in the film for me was when you read the article with the threat of your life and started crying. It doesn't break you, but you do give space for your personal emotions. This is very feminist, in my opinion, and one of the key steps in the feminizing of our systems, personally and publicly. Could you elaborate about that aspect of giving space to emotions in political system? Thank you, and thank you, Moran, for a beautiful question.
Thank you. It's a good question, because actually, I think that this is maybe part of female leadership often. And I've seen that those women, it has often been said that those countries that have women leaders have, during the pandemic, shown sort of better, being able to better deal with the pandemic. And of course, New Zealand is an example, but also how Angela Merkel in Germany and others have dealt with it. And what I think they do is they do it in their own way. They find their own expression for all of this, both the emotions, they are not afraid of that, but they also, and they trust science. They have nothing against sort of listening to the experts and then make their own decisions. And they dare to show emotions sometimes. And so I think that is, I don't know, at that point I was just overwhelmed, because it was, you know, when it hurts your family, that's worse. Then you know that you take a risk these days to become a leader and a visible leader. But it's when it hurts your family, that's the worst.
Sorry, yes. Yes, I think that here in Israel, we often say that violence against against women in politics is harder or difficult or more below the belt than towards men in politics. I will continue to Yofi Tirosh question. Yofi commented in the beginning about how it was inspiring to watch you. Despite the election results in the US, says Yofi, we are still in a post-truth and populist era, which tends to go hand in hand with sexism and misogyny. How to suggest talking to women who support these sentiments against their interests as women?
Yeah.
Well,
this is, yeah, it's true not only in the US, but there it has come to us through all the television reports and all the videos and what have you. We've seen it play out in front of our eyes, that you can have totally opposite ideas about what is the truth. And I think that would be the most dangerous and the most difficult task for a new president, to start to bridge that divide. And I really think if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, then you have to do that, because first of all, maybe we have to start to cut some things out, and we have to open up also to read what others think. We cannot stay in our own bubbles. And again, it goes back to what I said about political tools and dialogue and diplomacy. We have to use that more. And leadership again. We need leaders who can help to bridge those divides and overcome those gaps. But I really don't know exactly what is the most effective at the moment. And social media has a big role to play here. And where do you start to unwind? Maybe we should just cut a little bit out and instead meet with people in person, or with people that we haven't seen or listened to before. As long as they don't force me to listen to Jordan B. Peterson, then I'm happy.
I think that Yofi, she marked the word to women. Whether you have any suggestions how talking to women who support these sentiments, that maybe it's a different way.
I don't know. I think, very often the way to engage with women is to talk about the future of their children. How do you want your children to grow up? And it ought to be not only for women, but traditionally this has been the role of women mainly, and they seem to care more, for example, about climate change and the environment and those things, because we are geared that way sort of by experience and how we are raised ourselves to think about the future and have a more of a long-term thinking, because we are so impatient these days. And we have a short-term thinking economically, and all our structures are built to be short-term thinking. But maybe that is the way. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe somebody has a good way.
We'll
good
try
answer.
to work it. Aviva Hey asks, thank you for being with us today. Can you give a concrete example of a meaningful impact on a problem due to the participation of women in decision making, maybe from your tenure?
You mean in my country or overall?
She doesn't ask in your country, from international, different arenas that you...
Yeah, I can give a good example. Because when the peace negotiations in Colombia started, women were not involved fully. They were not part of the negotiation delegation that was placed in Cuba. Women got very upset, and women's organizations started a debate in Colombia about this, and they really demanded a seat at the table. And they also said they also made it possible to do a lot of events that engaged and listened to victims of the violence. Because normally in a peace negotiation, it's the warring parties. It's the men in uniform, those who have carried weapons, often in a conflict or a war, that sit together and then agree on how to share the spoils, so to say. But here women said, why don't we listen to all of these women? Because they are victims. And I remember that woman, when I traveled to Colombia, she came and she had made like a plastic band with a couple of photos, and it was her daughters. And she said, one daughter I know is dead. The other is missing, and I don't know where she is. Since many years, I don't know who took her or where she is. I will carry this until I know. And she said, but we haven't been given a voice. All of those who are affected, we are also victims of this conflict. So the whole peace process had to start these consultations with and invite victims. And there are so many, there are millions of these victims, but they started to do that. And in the end, women also had a seat at the table and a peace deal came about. And what happened when they took a seat at the table, they brought issues up like, well, if you don't deal with land use or land rights, there will never be peace, they said. And what do you do with all of those that then hand in their guns in the demobilization and so on? What happens with those? What can we do? So they came in with another perspective that was extremely helpful to the peace process. Not that it is perfect at all, and there are setbacks all the time, but they definitely fought for their right to have a seat at the table.
Yes, I must tell you that we are, in promoting 1325 in Israel, we are using and referring a lot to the Colombian example as an inspiration, because in some ways people in Israel can relate to it more than other conflicts, perhaps, I'm not sure. Hadass Ben Eliyahu is asking a very interesting question, in my opinion. Do you see connection between a feminist foreign policy and the level of gender-based violence in Sweden itself?
Every country in the world, unfortunately, experiences gender-based violence and domestic violence. I don't know exactly where we are I have not updated my own knowledge about the statistics, where we are placed in that list. One thing that I know we have in common, though, which is a very important thing, and I'm so happy that Israel has joined on the road towards the Nordic model when it comes to prostitution and those who buy sex, that you criminalize the buyers instead of criminalizing the women. And I really applaud you for doing that. This is the way forward. And not that any system today is perfect, because we are dealing with such enormous, strong, powerful, very often illegal forces, and I mean money, big money invested in this, but this is the right approach to it. So I of course think that in a society where you have more sort of where you have both a legal framework that protects women, and you have more of awareness, and you have a society with higher respect for women, I hope also that we will be able to bring the levels of violence down. Mm-hmm. But maybe somebody else has the current statistics about where we end up in the global comparison.
Okay, we will look it up. Hannah Safran, I think we'll have time for 2 more questions. So Hannah Safran is asking, would you agree that the term feminist is crucial? Margaret Thatcher, a woman, and so was Golda Meir, and their policies were totally militaristic. The words of Hannah Safran.
Well, it was very important to choose that word. First, because you then had a chance to tell everybody what the dictionary says about what it is. So you can tell that to the world, but also because if you choose something less sort of controversial, then I think it wouldn't have been noticed. But now we have at least 5 countries that have followed in our footsteps, and we have a lot of interest. So it often starts with ministers or ambassadors saying, help me to understand, what is this? Why does it belong to the foreign policy? why is it a feminist foreign policy? Because you can say, well, very often we've had gender equality when it comes to development or aid policies. But that is more or less a given. But why does it belong to the foreign policy? Because more women means more peace. The facts we have, the statistics we have show clearly that when women are involved at every stage, as 1325 says, then you will have a better chance of reaching to peace and also keeping peace in a country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Miri Sharon is asking, in the movie, during the meeting with women in Afghanistan, you tell them they should create their own coalition. What would you recommend to women peace movements in Israel to become more effective and influence, or maybe how, and to influence the government?
I don't think I am the one to give advice. I think you know the situation best. I can only encourage you to sort of fight on and struggle on. And I only know very powerful, fantastic Israeli women. I mean, you know what it is. You know fear, because that has been always a part of your lives and your history. You know all the conflicts and the struggle for everyday life. You know the extremist positions. I think you know how to negotiate and to mediate and to do all of the things that are necessary. So, but you have to fight for a seat at the table, in the government, in the Knesset, everywhere. You have to make sure that you get to that critical mass. And sometimes I think that women in a country can have sort of a too ambitious agenda. I think you often have to start with a few things to say, well, we have to start with the issue of violence against women, because the minute you fear being in your own home, how do you dare then to take on a bigger role? Or if it is, the fact that that there is so much discrimination against you taking certain jobs or not having the same salary, being paid the same thing. So maybe you have to make that kind of sometimes a shorter agenda, and not ask that all men immediately sort of become feminists, because it will not happen that way. It will take some time, and you might have to just prioritize. But that is just I am not the one to give many advice.
I want to, we ran out of time, but I see that we have more questions, but I want to use one last question to one of the participants, Palestinian colleague from the Jerusalem Center for Women, Fadwa El-Shaer. She asks how the international community helps the Palestinian women to be secure in their life and daily life, and while suffering from the military violence.
Well, this is the thing for sort of both sides here also. In Israel, of course, women feel that if they can't walk in the street without having fear of being attacked or something that violent will happen to them. Palestinian women who also fear for being displaced from one where they live, or the kind of violence that they feel also against their whole existence. I think that this is where there has to be a dialogue, where you have to meet and continue to insist on finding these meetings and talking about it. And I think it's very important for the European Union that engages so much, as well as the UN, of course, but especially for the European Union, to stay united and to also engage in such a way that we will continue to insist on a two-state solution, as you know. As remote as it may seem, we still think that that's the only realistic scenario for the future. And it means that we have to be able to meet somewhere. And we were engaged in projects then Sweden in making sure that civil society organizations could meet. But this became more and more difficult, unfortunately. But we were in contact with, I think, 500 different organizations, both Palestinian and Israeli. And I think that is the way, that's how we have to do it. And it starts with children also, and young people. What do we teach them? So, there is so much on the ground that has to happen also in ensuring that you can be safe.
I thank you very much. I wanted to say just that among the students that participated in several of our events were students for education, students studying to be teachers, because we, as lawyers, women lawyers, and activists in different fields, we're very much aware how education is, and the change in the education level is very much needed. Margot Wallström, I wanted to thank you very, very much for the inspiration and the leadership, and for joining us. There were almost around 200 participants, and we had it also in Facebook Live. It was a great honor.
No, it was an honor for me. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you all who have been listening and engaging. And you know that you have a friend in me also in everything that you try to do. So I can only encourage you to continue both with the dialogue and with the work that you are doing. Thank you so much.